The heavy ornate doors of St. Patrick's Cathedral creaked shut behind her, leaving Beatrice in the suffocating silence of the nave. Her size 20 wedding gown, once a dream of lace and silk, felt like a leaden weight pulling her down. Arthur hadn't come. As the cruel whispers of the social elite began to rise like a tide, Beatrice ripped the veil from her head and fled, driving until the city lights faded into the shadows of the forgotten Astoria Biltmore estate. She sought only darkness, but deep in the manor's hidden bunkers, she found something far more dangerous, a wounded man, a gun and a choice that would seal her fate forever. Beatrice Harrington stood at the altar of the St. Patrick's Cathedral, suffocating. It was not just the heavy, intricately beaded corset of her custom size 20 wedding gown digging mercilessly into her soft waist, nor the immense pressure of the crowded pews staring at her. It was the crushing, absolute silence. Arthur was not coming. The whispers rippled through the congregation like venomous snakes. She could hear the cruel, hushed tones of Arthur's mother in the front row. I told him a woman of her size couldn't possibly keep up appearances. He finally came to his senses. Beatrice's face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson. She was a beautiful woman with lush, generous curves, thick raven hair, and a warm, inviting smile. But in the wealthy, superficial circles Arthur inhabited, her plus-size figure had always been a quiet scandal. He had promised to protect her from their judgment. Instead, he had left her standing alone under the vaulted ceilings, her heart fracturing into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Tearing the heavy tulle veil from her head, Beatrice did not wait for the priest to offer his hollow sympathies. She gathered the massive skirts of her gown, the silk heavy against her full thighs, and ran. She pushed past the heavy oak doors, ignoring the flashbulbs of society photographers, and threw herself into her idling town car. She needed to disappear. There was only one place left, where no one from high society would ever look for her, the grand decaying walls of the Astoria Biltmore Manor. Just 3 weeks prior, Beatrice had inherited the sprawling, forgotten 1920s estate from her estranged grandfather. Located deep in the isolated forested hills outside the city, the manor was an architectural marvel, hiding a labyrinth of Prohibition-era secrets. Her grandfather's will had been explicit. The property contained a vast network of hidden subterranean bunkers, a forgotten asset she had yet to fully explore. Today, its isolated fortified walls offered the only sanctuary she craved. By the time she arrived at the wrought iron gates, a torrential thunderstorm had broken over the estate. Beatrice navigated the dark, dusty halls of the manor, her soaked wedding dress dragging across the marble floors like a weighted anchor. She needed to get to the absolute bottom of the house, away from the roaring thunder and the agonizing memory of the altar. Engaging the hidden mechanism behind the library's fireplace, she descended the spiral stone staircase into the sub-basement bunker. The air below was cold and smelled of damp limestone. But as Beatrice stepped onto the concrete floor, a metallic copper scent hit her senses. Blood. Slumped against the steel-reinforced door of the inner vault was a man. He was dressed in a ruined bespoke Italian suit, his stark white shirt completely saturated with deep arterial crimson. He was massive with broad, muscular shoulders and a sharply angled aristocratic face that looked as though it had been carved from marble. Even unconscious, he radiated a lethal, terrifying aura. For a fraction of a second, the terrified, abandoned bride wanted to run back up the stairs, but the intensive care unit charge nurse inside her took over. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Beatrice managed the most chaotic, high-stakes medical crises imaginable. The panic dissolved into pure, calculated adrenaline. She dropped to her knees beside him, the heavy layers of her ruined wedding dress pooling in his blood. "Hey," she commanded, tapping his jaw firmly. "Can you hear me? Look at me." No response. His skin was dangerously cold, pale beneath his olive complexion. Beatrice immediately assessed the primary injury, a gunshot wound to the upper right quadrant of his chest, dangerously close to the subclavian artery, and another grazing shot to his thigh. He was in hypervolemic shock. His pulse was thready racing at an erratic 130 beats per minute, his systolic blood pressure likely plummeting. Working with frantic precision, Beatrice ripped the pristine silk of her gown, tearing the heavy fabric into thick strips. She needed to pack the wound to stop the massive hemorrhage. She pressed her hands directly into the pooling blood on his chest, applying brutal, agonizing pressure to the wound track. The man groaned, his eyes flying open. They were a terrifying, icy shade of blue. Even on the brink of death, his gaze pinned her to the spot like a predator cornering prey. His large, blood-slicked hand shot out, wrapping around her throat with startling strength. "Who sent you?" He rasped, his voice a low, gravelly threat. "I'm trying to save your life, you idiot!" Beatrice snapped back, slapping his hand away from her throat without breaking eye contact. "If you don't let me pack this wound, you are going to bleed out in my basement in less than 4 minutes. Now hold still." Dominic Costa, the undisputed head of the most ruthless Mafia syndicate on the eastern seaboard, blinked in sheer disbelief. He was bleeding out in a hidden bunker, and a beautiful, fiercely determined woman in a blood-soaked wedding dress was barking orders at him. Beatrice didn't wait for his permission. She used her torn veil to create a pressure dressing, utilizing a broken piece of a nearby wooden crate to fashion a makeshift windlass tourniquet for his leg. She worked with the practiced, merciless efficiency of a seasoned trauma specialist, managing his airway and stabilizing his critical vitals using nothing but the rags of her bridal gown and the sheer force of her will. For 3 hours it was a battle against the Reaper. Beatrice sat beside him on the cold floor, monitoring his pulse rate, checking his capillary refill, and listening to the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Against all odds, the bleeding stopped. The crisis passed. Exhausted, Beatrice leaned her head back against the cold stone wall, her beautiful, tear-streaked face smudged with dirt and the blood of a violent stranger. The adrenaline faded, leaving only the agonizing hollow ache of Arthur's betrayal. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her soft arms around her full waist, and finally allowed herself to cry. When Dominic Costa fully regained consciousness, the world was cast in the dim, golden light of the bunker's emergency bulbs. Pain radiated through his chest and leg, but he was alive. He took a slow, rattling breath and turned his head. A few feet away, asleep on a dusty Chesterfield sofa, was the woman who had saved him. Dominic studied her carefully. She was not the skeletal, fragile socialites that usually populated his dark world. She was wonderfully substantial, with plush, rounded hips, a soft, inviting stomach, and heavy breasts that spilled beautifully against the top of a violently ruined, jewel-encrusted wedding bodice. Her thick, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that was angelic, even in its exhaustion. But what struck Dominic the most were her hands, stained with his blood. They were the steady, capable hands of a lifesaver. He slowly pieced together his surroundings, the arched limestone ceilings, the rusted Prohibition-era barrels, the structural layout. A slow, dark realization dawned on him. He wasn't just in a random cellar. He was in the legendary underground labyrinth of the Astoria Biltmore Manor. For 6 months, Dominic's syndicate had been fighting a brutal territorial war against the rival Calabrese family. The Calabrese faction had orchestrated yesterday's ambush, nearly killing him. Dominic needed a secure, unbreachable fortress to regroup, a place off the grid, but large enough to house his most loyal men and operate his logistics. This estate, with its hidden tunnels leading directly to the river, was the ultimate strategic choke point. He needed this property, but the property belonged to Elias Harrington's heir. Dominic shifted, wincing as the pain flared. The movement woke Beatrice. She gasped immediately, sitting up, her hands instinctively flying to her chest. "You shouldn't be moving," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she approached him. "Your stitches, well, my makeshift tape will tear." "Who are you?" Dominic demanded, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. Beatrice Harrington," she replied, keeping her distance, suddenly overwhelmingly aware of how isolated she was with this dangerous man. Dominic's icy blue eyes narrowed. The pieces fell into place with a satisfying, lethal click. "Why are you wearing a wedding dress in a damp basement, Beatrice Harrington?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She looked down at the ruined, blood-soaked lace. "That is none of your business. I saved your life. You're stable enough. Once the storm passes, you need to leave." Dominic let out a dark, breathless chuckle, coughing slightly. "Leave no cara mio. I don't think I will. In fact, I think we are going to be spending a great deal of time together." He pushed himself up against the wall, ignoring the agony in his chest. "Let me tell you what I know. You were left at the altar today. I know this because the man who was supposed to marry you, Arthur Pendleton, is a weak, pathetic coward who owes my rivals, the Calabrese family, $4 million in gambling debts." Beatrice froze, the color draining from her face. "What I know Arthur is, he's a junior partner at a law firm. He doesn't gamble. He sold you out." "Beatrice," Dominic said coldly, delivering the brutal truth without an ounce of pity. "The Calabrese family knew you inherited this estate. They wanted it. Arthur traded his wedding ring and his right to this property to clear his debt. He didn't just abandon you. He served you up on a silver platter. They are likely tearing through the city right now looking for you." "You're lying," Beatrice whispered, tears welling in her eyes, though deep down a terrifying intuition told her he was speaking the absolute truth. Arthur's sudden nervousness, the secret phone, calls, the way his mother looked at her with such disdain. "I don't lie," Dominic stated, his gaze hardening. "My name is Dominic Costa, and right now I am the only thing standing between you and the men who want to bury you in these tunnels." Beatrice backed away, her breathing turning shallow. She had traded a humiliating public rejection for a subterranean nightmare with a Mafia boss. "What do you want from me?" Dominic looked at the trembling, beautiful woman in front of him. She was terrified, but she hadn't broken. She had the steel to stitch up a mobster without flinching. She possessed the exact legal front he needed, and he possessed the firepower to keep her alive. "The Calabrese family thinks you are a vulnerable, abandoned bride," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous hypnotic register. "They think they can just walk in here and take this estate from the fat, lonely girl Arthur threw away." Beatrice flinched at the word, a lifetime of insecurities flaring up. But Dominic's eyes held no mockery. They held a terrifying, possessive fire. "We are going to prove them wrong," Dominic commanded. "You are going to grant me full legal access to this estate's underground network. In exchange, I will bring my army here and crush the men hunting you. But for this to work for the 5 families, to respect the boundary, you cannot be a single unprotected civilian." He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently but firmly gripping her wrist, pulling her slightly closer. The heat radiating from his large body was overwhelming. "Tomorrow morning, we walk into the city." Dominic ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You will put on a brave face. You will look every camera and every enemy in the eye, and you will pretend to be my wife." I can't," Beatrice stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't know anything about your world. I'm a nurse. I'm not a mobster's wife." "You are now," Dominic stated smoothly, his thumb brushing against her racing pulse. "You saved my life, Beatrice. That means your life belongs to me. Play the part of the devoted, untouchable Mrs. Costa, and I swear to you no one will ever humiliate or hurt you again. But if you run, you won't survive the week." He released her wrist, leaning back against the cold stone, the absolute ruler of the dark domain she had inadvertently invited him into. "We have a deal, bride." Beatrice looked at the blood on her hands, at the ruined dress that was supposed to symbolize her happily ever after, and then into the ruthless, unyielding eyes of Dominic Costa. She had nothing left to lose, and a horrifying, dangerous world to survive. "Deal," she whispered into the dark. Morning light broke over the Manhattan skyline, casting harsh shadows across the opulent penthouse suite at the Carlyle Hotel. Beatrice stood before a gilded floor-to-ceiling mirror, her trembling fingers smoothing the emerald-green silk of a custom gown Dominic had ordered. It fit her generous plus-size curves, flawlessly draping over her full hips and cinching her soft waist. Gone was the terrified, abandoned bride from yesterday. In her place stood a woman terrified of the Mafia, yet radiating an undeniable regal presence. Dominic entered the room, his movements stiff but commanding, courtesy of the sutures a discreet underground doctor had applied hours earlier. He wore a charcoal Brioni suit that concealed the bandages wrapping his chest. His icy blue eyes swept over Beatrice, a flicker of genuine appreciation softening his lethal gaze. He approached slowly, his large hands settling on her bare shoulders. The heat of his touch sent a jolt of electricity down her spine, a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in her stomach. "Breathe, Beatrice," Dominic murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Today we claim the narrative. We are going to Bergdorf Goodman, and then we are dining at Le Bernardin. You will not hide your figure, you will flaunt it. Let high society see the queen I chose over their fragile, hollow debutantes." Beatrice swallowed hard, staring at their reflection. They looked dangerous together. "Arthur and his mother frequent the Fifth Avenue boutiques on Saturday mornings," she whispered, her anxiety spiking. "What if we see them?" Dominic's jaw tightened, a ruthless smirk playing on his lips. "That is precisely the objective, cara mia. Let the coward see the empire he surrendered." 2 hours later, a fleet of armored Cadillac Escalades surrounded the entrance of Bergdorf Goodman. Paparazzi, tipped off by Dominic's lieutenants, swarmed the sidewalks. Flashbulbs erupted as Dominic stepped out, immediately extending a hand to Beatrice. She emerged, the emerald silk clinging to her voluptuous frame, her dark hair styled in cascading waves. She anchored her hand in Dominic's, forcing her chin up. He pulled her close, his arm wrapping securely around her thick waist, an undeniable brand of ownership and protection. Whispers ignited like wildfire among the wealthy elite, browsing the designer floors. Beatrice felt the familiar sting of judgmental stares targeting her size, but Dominic's presence was a heavy, impenetrable shield. As they approached the jewelry counters, the crowd parted. There, standing near a display of diamond chokers, was Arthur Pendleton. Beside him was his mother, Beatrice's former tormentor, clutching a crocodile Hermes Birkin bag. Arthur turned, the color draining from his face instantly. He looked from Beatrice's stunning, confident appearance to the terrifying, towering figure of Dominic Costa. The junior lawyer looked entirely pathetic, sweating through his pastel Ralph Lauren polo. "Beatrice," Arthur stammered, voice cracking. What are you doing with him?" Dominic didn't let her answer. He stepped forward, the sheer force of his predatory aura pushing Arthur back a step. "You will address my wife with the respect she commands, Pendleton." Dominic growled, the deadly calm in his tone freezing the entire room. Arthur's mother scoffed, though her hands shook violently. "Wife, don't be absurd. She's a delusional, oversized girl who couldn't even keep my son interested for a simple ceremony. She—" In a blur of motion, Dominic's bodyguard, a hulking man named Matteo, stepped forward, but Dominic raised a single finger, halting him. He stared down at Arthur's mother, with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. "Finish that sentence, Mrs. Pendleton, and your son's remaining gambling debts will be collected in pieces. Beatrice is a Costa now. She is the undisputed mistress of the Astoria Biltmore estate, and my chosen equal. You threw away a diamond because you were too ignorant to recognize its worth." Dominic turned his attention back to Arthur, who was physically trembling. "You sold her out to Lorenzo Calabrese. You put a target on her back to save your own pathetic skin. If I ever see you within 100 yards of my wife again, the Hudson River will be your permanent residence. Do we understand each other?" Arthur nodded frantically, unable to form words. He grabbed his mother's arm and practically dragged her out of the department store, fleeing in absolute disgrace. Beatrice stood, paralyzed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. No one had ever defended her like that. Arthur had always made excuses for his mother's cruelty, constantly asking Beatrice to shrink herself, both physically and emotionally, to fit into their world. Dominic didn't want her to shrink. He weaponized her presence. He turned to her, his expression softening marginally, and lifted a breathtaking 15-carat Harry Winston diamond ring from the velvet display tray. He slid the heavy platinum band onto her trembling finger. "A temporary placeholder," Dominic murmured softly, though the possessive fire in his eyes burned fiercely. "Until we can do this properly." Just as the ring settled on her finger, the heavy glass doors of the boutique shattered. Gunfire erupted, the deafening cracks echoing off the marble floors. Screams filled the air as shoppers dove for cover. The Calabrese syndicate had found them. Dominic reacted instantly, tackling Beatrice to the floor, shielding her generous body entirely with his own massive frame. Glass rained down around them like deadly hail. "Matteo, get the cars to the rear!" Dominic roared over the chaos, drawing a sleek Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. He looked down at Beatrice, his face inches from hers. "Are you hit?" "No!" She gasped, her nursing instincts kicking in. She noticed a fresh bloom of red seeping through Dominic's jacket. "You tore your stitches, you're bleeding again." "Irrelevant," he barked. "We move now." He hauled her up, keeping her tucked safely under his arm as they sprinted through the back corridors of the luxury store, dodging terrified employees. Beatrice didn't freeze. She kept pace, her adrenaline surging, utilizing her knowledge of building layouts from her hospital emergency drills to guide them toward the freight elevators. They burst into the alleyway, diving into the waiting armored SUV, just as a spray of bullets riddled the brick wall behind them. As the vehicle peeled away, tires screaming against the asphalt, Beatrice pressed a clean silk handkerchief against Dominic's bleeding side. Her hands were steady, her resolve ironclad. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. Midnight cloaked the Astoria Biltmore Manor in impenetrable darkness. The storm from the previous day had returned, lashing heavy rain against the fortified stone walls. Inside the subterranean war room, Dominic reviewed the tactical monitors. The Calabrese family, desperate and enraged by the public humiliation at Bergdorf Goodman, had mobilized a massive assault force. Lorenzo Calabrese knew Dominic was injured and believed the estate was vulnerable. He was dead wrong. Beatrice stood beside the heavy mahogany table, her eyes scanning the blueprints of the manor. She had swapped the designer gown for tactical black cargo pants and a fitted sweater that hugged her curves. She looked completely at home among Dominic's seasoned soldiers. Her medical bag sat open on a nearby crate, fully stocked with supplies she had smuggled from the Mount Sinai inventory during a brief, daring detour. "They are massing at the eastern perimeter," Matteo reported, loading a heavy assault rifle. "Lorenzo brought at least 40 men. They want the tunnels." Dominic gritted his teeth, the pain in his chest a constant fiery reminder of his mortality. He looked at Beatrice, his hard expression cracking with a rare flash of vulnerability. "I need you to go down to the tertiary bunker. Lock the steel door from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me." Beatrice crossed her arms over her chest, planting her feet firmly. "Absolutely not. I am the triage nurse. If your men get hit, they need me here. I am not hiding in a hole while you bleed out defending my grandfather's property." "Beatrice," Dominic warned, stepping closer, his massive frame towering over her. "This isn't a hospital. This is a slaughter." "And I am your wife," she countered fiercely, her chin tilting up to meet his intense gaze. "You told the entire city that I am a Costa. You told Arthur I was your equal. Did you mean it, or was that just a performance?" Dominic stared at her, completely captivated. The women in his world were either fragile ornaments or calculated vipers. Beatrice was a force of nature. Her soft, lush body housed a spirit made of pure titanium. He reached out his hand, cupping the side of her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "I meant every single word," he confessed, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I will protect you with my last breath." "Then let me protect your men," she replied softly, leaning into his touch. The first explosion rattled the foundations of the manor. The siege had begun. For the next 3 hours, the Astoria Biltmore transformed into a war zone. Gunfire echoed through the lavish, decaying hallways above them. Beatrice worked relentlessly in the secondary bunker, which she had converted into a makeshift trauma bay. She packed wounds, applied tourniquets, and stabilized 3 of Dominic's men, her hands moving with lightning speed and flawless precision. The terror was overwhelming, but she compartmentalized it, focusing entirely on the lives in her hands. Above ground, Dominic fought like a demon. Despite his injuries, his tactical brilliance tore Lorenzo's assault force apart. Utilizing the hidden passages and trap doors Beatrice had mapped out for him, Dominic's men outflanked the Calabrese soldiers at every turn. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the medical bunker hissed open. Beatrice spun around a scalpel, gripped tightly in her hand, ready to fight. Lorenzo Calabrese stood in the doorway, a vicious sneer twisting his scarred face. His suit was ruined, and he held a leveled pistol directly at Beatrice's chest. He had slipped past the main firefight using an old servant's passageway. "Well, well," Lorenzo mocked, his eyes raking over her full figure with absolute disgust. "The fat little bride who caused all this trouble. Costa is a fool for bleeding over a pig like you. Arthur had the right idea when he sold you out." Beatrice didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on Lorenzo, her mind racing. "Arthur is a coward, and you are standing in a room filled with pure medical oxygen tanks." Lorenzo frowned, glancing around the room. He didn't notice Beatrice's hand sliding toward the emergency shut-off valve on the wall. "If you fire that weapon, the spark will ignite the ambient oxygen." Beatrice lied flawlessly, her voice cold and steady. "It won't just kill me. It will incinerate this entire room, and you along with it." Lorenzo hesitated, his finger loosening slightly on the trigger. It was a fraction of a second, but it was all the time Dominic needed. Emerging silently from the shadows of the corridor behind Lorenzo, Dominic moved with terrifying speed. He wrapped his arm around Lorenzo's throat, snapping his neck with a brutal, sickening crunch. Lorenzo's body hit the floor, lifeless. Dominic stood over the body, breathing heavily, blood seeping through his shirt. He looked at Beatrice, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Oxygen tanks. I made it up. Beatrice exhaled, dropping the scalpel, her knees finally giving out. The tanks are empty. Dominic let out a breathless, echoing laugh. He crossed the room in 2 strides, falling to his knees and pulling her violently into his arms. He buried his face in her dark hair, inhaling her scent, his massive body shaking with the adrenaline of almost losing her. "You are magnificent," he whispered intensely, kissing her temple, her cheek the corner of her mouth. "You are completely, utterly magnificent." Beatrice wrapped her arms around his thick neck, holding him just as tightly, finally allowing the tears to fall. She wasn't crying from fear anymore. She was crying from overwhelming relief. She belonged here, in the arms of a monster who treated her like a goddess. 3 months later, the sun shone brightly over the manicured gardens of the fully restored Astoria Biltmore Manor. The Calabresi family had been completely absorbed by the Costa Syndicate, their power permanently broken. The city belonged to Dominic, but Dominic belonged entirely to Beatrice. She stood on the grand balcony overlooking the estate, wearing a simple, elegant ivory silk dress that celebrated every lush curve of her body. There were no corsets, no uncomfortable expectations, and no judgmental society whispers. The only guests were Matteo and the men she had saved in the bunker, men who now looked at her with fierce, absolute loyalty. Dominic stepped up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pulling her back against his solid chest. He kissed the sensitive skin beneath her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Are you ready, Mrs. Costa?" he murmured softly. Beatrice turned in his arms, looking up into the icy blue eyes that no longer held any danger for her only bottomless adoration. She reached up, tracing his jawline. She was no longer the terrified, abandoned bride. She was the Mafia queen of the eastern seaboard, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I've been ready since the day I saved your life." Beatrice smiled, pulling him down for a deep, searing kiss. The priest waiting in the garden cleared his throat, but neither Dominic nor Beatrice paid him any attention. Their vows had already been written in blood survival, and a love far more dangerous and enduring than anything high society could ever comprehend. The contract was null and void, the reality was permanent, and that concludes the thrilling saga of Pretend to Be My Wife. From an abandoned bride to the undisputed Mafia queen, Beatrice proved true power comes from within. Did you love this explosive story of revenge, survival, and unexpected romance? If her journey captivated you, please hit that like that button and share this video with your fellow romance addicts. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss our next high-stakes drama. Comment your favorite twist.